Out in the vast deserts of the Middle East, a narrow mountain pass cuts through the landscape. Moving through it is a single figure, leading a worn-out group of nomads and herders. They are exhausted, overlooked, and seemingly insignificant, like grains of sand swallowed by the desert. Around them, powerful empires dominate the world with absolute control. No one notices this fragile group. No one expects anything from them. By all logic, they are meant to live under the rule of others and eventually disappear without a trace. But their leader refuses to accept that fate. His name is Aquêmenes. He wears no crown. He commands no grand cities. There are no monuments built in his honor. What he does possess is something far more dangerous: relentless instinct, resilience, and the will to survive against impossible odds. From his rough hands and hardened life will emerge something no one at the time could have predicted: a legacy. What begins as a struggling tribal group in a harsh environment will, over time, evolve into a force capable of reshaping history. The seed planted in this unforgiving land will grow stronger, overcome brutal challenges, and eventually expand across 3 major regions. Ordinary people, once ignored and dismissed, will rise to form one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. This is the story of Aquêmenes and the legendary origins of the Persians. But before we go further, a quick recommendation. If you want a deeper understanding of this era, consider the book The Persians, The Age of the Great Kings. It explores the rise of one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world, with a strong focus on iconic rulers like Cyrus the Great, Xerxes, Darius, and other key figures of the Aquemenid dynasty. The book breaks down military strategy, internal power struggles, and the decisions that shaped the empire's rise. It's written in a clear, engaging style, making it accessible even if you're new to ancient history. If you're interested, you can check the link provided with this video. Now, back to the story. To truly understand the origins of the Persians, we need to travel back in time, specifically to the late 8th century BCE, around the year 700. Our setting is the southwestern region of what is now Iran, in a rugged and unforgiving mountain range known as the Zagros Mountains. This is not a place of comfort or stability. It is a land shaped by survival, where only the strongest endure. And it is here that Aquêmenes enters the stage. He is not a king in the traditional sense, but a tribal leader, guiding semi-nomadic warriors and shepherds through a life defined by constant struggle. Every day is a fight for resources, safety, and survival. To put things into perspective, the Persians at this time are not a dominant force. They are not even contenders. In the grand hierarchy of the ancient world, they are the small fish, living in the shadow of far greater powers. The true source of fear in the ancient Middle East was not a small tribe struggling to survive. It was the relentless power of the Assyrian Empire. This was a military machine known for its discipline, brutality, and total domination over Mesopotamia. Its reach extended across vast territories, crushing resistance wherever it appeared. We even find early evidence of this imbalance of power in ancient records. In inscriptions dating back to the 9th century BCE, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser I refers to a group known as the Parsua, widely believed to be the ancestors of the Persians, paying heavy tribute to Assyria. This was not an alliance, it was submission. Aquêmenes led one of these mountain tribes. Interestingly, his name carries a meaning along the lines of one with a friendly spirit or a man of gentle mind. But in a region trapped between 2 powerful forces, the ruthless Assyrians on one side and the ancient, wealthy kingdom of Elam on the other, kindness alone offered no protection. Survival required far more than goodwill. Centuries later, the Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, described the Persians as a collection of distinct tribes. Some lived as nomads, constantly on the move, while others settled into agricultural life. They were not unified, they were not powerful, they were fragmented. And this is where Aquêmenes made his mark. His achievement was not conquest in the traditional sense. He did not build cities or wage massive campaigns. Instead, he did something far more fundamental. He organized and stabilized his own people. He focused on the Pasargadae, considered the most prominent of the Persian tribes, and ensured their survival in a region where entire cultures could vanish within a generation. He led them through harsh mountain terrain, establishing a foothold in what would later become known as Persia. Aquêmenes did not live to see an empire rise. In fact, it is likely he died without ever imagining that his descendants would one day overshadow the very empires that once dominated them. The Assyrians and Babylonians, then the giants of the world, would eventually be eclipsed. But that future began with one simple reality. Aquêmenes kept his people alive. At this stage, the foundation had been laid, but it was still fragile. A scattered network of semi-nomadic herders and warriors is not, by itself, a nation. So how does such a group transform into a unified people with a distinct identity? The answer lies in a turning point that appears again and again throughout history: a power vacuum. Now picture the Middle East in the 7th century BCE, around 650. The two dominant forces in the region, the Assyrian Empire and the Kingdom of Elam, were locked in relentless conflict. These were not small skirmishes. These were devastating wars that drained resources, shattered cities, and destabilized entire regions. At the center of this chaos was the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. Known for both his intellect and his ruthlessness, he launched a devastating campaign against Elam. In 646 BCE, his forces destroyed the Elamite capital, Susa, in what can only be described as total annihilation. The city was dismantled, its power broken beyond recovery. It was a decisive victory, but also a costly one. Because when great powers exhaust themselves in conflict, they create space for others to rise. And that is exactly what happened. With Elam shattered and no longer able to defend its territory, the descendants of Aquêmenes saw their moment. The Pasargadae, now led by his son Thespes, seized the opportunity. They moved down from the harsh mountain valleys and began to occupy the fertile lands left unguarded. This was no longer just survival. This was expansion. For the first time, the Persians were no longer simply reacting to the world around them. They were beginning to shape it. They settled in a region known as Anshan, located in the south of what is now Iran. This move changed everything. For the first time, they were no longer drifting through hostile terrain or surviving on the margins. They were claiming land, establishing control, and building something permanent. This was a shift from survival to strategy. Thespes, the son of Aquêmenes, went even further. He formally adopted the title of King of Anshan. That title mattered. It signaled ambition, structure, and the beginning of political identity. But claiming land is only the first step. Holding it, especially in a volatile region, requires far more than a title. To avoid being wiped out at the first sign of conflict, they needed unity, both militarily and socially. As recorded by Herodotus, the Persian world at the time was divided into multiple tribes. Some were settled farmers, others remained nomadic. Each had its own interests, its own priorities. Left divided, they would remain weak, but under strong leadership, they could become something far more dangerous. What Thespes and his successors achieved was essentially the unification of these groups. They brought key warrior tribes into a single alliance, setting aside internal rivalries to form a coordinated front. This was not just cooperation, it was consolidation under the authority of the Aquemenid family. This moment marks the true birth of a Persian identity. By firmly establishing themselves in the region known as Parsa, the linguistic root of the word Persia, they gained more than territory. They gained roots, stability, a sense of belonging tied to land, not just movement. And perhaps one of their smartest decisions was cultural adaptation. Rather than erase the legacy of the defeated Elamite civilization, they absorbed parts of it. They adopted administrative practices, systems of writing, and elements of bureaucracy. At the same time, they preserved their own core traits, discipline, tribal loyalty, and the resilience forged in the Zagros Mountains. This blend of structure and strength became a defining advantage. Now we move forward in time. The tribes are unified, the territory is secured, the cultural foundation is in place. But how does a regional power transform into a ruling dynasty? The answer lies in something deeper than armies or land: legitimacy. In the ancient world, power alone was not enough. A ruler needed to prove that their authority was justified, that it was backed by lineage, by tradition, and often by divine approval. Kings did not simply claim power, they inherited it, or at least presented it that way. And this is where the name of Aquêmenes becomes far more than a memory. It becomes a symbol. One of his descendants would take that symbol and turn it into a foundation for empire, a man whose name would echo through history: Cyrus the Great. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus did more than lead the Persians, he changed the balance of power entirely. He defeated the Median Empire, one of the dominant forces of the region, and unified the two peoples under his rule. From there, his expansion was relentless. He conquered Lydia, a kingdom known for its immense wealth, and in 539 BCE, he captured Babylon, one of the most important cities of the ancient world. But here's the critical detail. Even at the height of his power, commanding one of the largest empires on earth, Cyrus never abandoned his origins. In Pasargadae, the first major capital he established, archaeologists have uncovered cuneiform inscriptions carved into stone structures. They are brief, almost understated, but incredibly revealing. The most famous of them reads, "I and Cyrus, the king, an Aquemenid." That single line carries immense weight. Cyrus had armies, he had victories, he had an empire. But his strongest claim to authority was his lineage, his connection to Aquêmenes. The name had evolved from that of a tribal leader into a mark of legitimacy, a political institution in its own right. To rule, you needed more than power. You needed that bloodline. The Aquemenid name became synonymous with kingship. Without it, a crown held no true authority in the Persian world. Over time, this lineage was solidified into a dynasty that ruled much of the Middle East for over 2 centuries. But now, the story takes a sharp and unexpected turn. After everything we've explored, the rise from scattered tribes, the creation of a shared identity, the elevation of lineage, we're faced with a critical question. Did Aquêmenes truly exist, or was he a carefully constructed figure, a form of early political branding used to legitimize power? To explore that mystery, we move to the year 522 BCE. By this point, Cyrus the Great is gone. His son and successor, Cambyses II, has died under sudden and uncertain circumstances while returning from a campaign in Egypt. The empire stands powerful, but unstable. And what happens next will test everything built on that legendary name. The empire began to fracture. Rebellions erupted across multiple regions, each one threatening to tear the structure apart. At the center of it all, a brutal succession crisis unfolded. Power was no longer stable. It was up for grabs. The court became a battlefield of ambition, betrayal, and survival. Out of this chaos, a young nobleman stepped forward. His name was Darius I. He did not inherit the throne peacefully. He seized it by force, killing the man who held power before him. In time, he would be remembered as Darius the Great, a brilliant military strategist and an exceptional administrator. But at that moment, none of that guaranteed acceptance, because Darius had a serious problem. He was not the son of Cyrus the Great. He was not part of the direct royal line. To many Persians and to the countless peoples under imperial rule, he looked like exactly what he feared most, a usurper with a sword. So the question became unavoidable. How do you transform raw power into legitimate authority? Darius understood that ruling an empire required more than control. It required belief. People needed to accept his right to rule, not just fear his ability to enforce it. His solution was bold, calculated, and deeply strategic. He turned to propaganda on a monumental scale. High on a cliff in the Zagros Mountains, he ordered the creation of what we now know as the Behistun inscription. Carved directly into stone at an immense height, visible for miles, this inscription was written in 3 different languages. It was not just a message, it was a statement meant to last forever. In it, Darius tells his version of events. He explains how he came to power. But more importantly, he does something else, something even more critical. He defines his lineage. Within that inscription, Darius makes a powerful claim. I am Darius, the great king, king of kings. Our family has been royal from ancient times. 8 of my family were kings before me. I am the 9th. And at the very top of that family tree, he places one name above all others, Aquêmenes. This was the masterstroke. By linking himself to Aquêmenes, Darius wasn't just creating a story, he was building legitimacy. His message to the empire was clear. Cyrus came from this lineage, and so do I. Different branches, same royal blood. With that, rebellion lost its narrative. He was no longer an outsider, he was part of the same sacred line. But here's where history becomes uncertain. Many modern historians and archaeologists question this entire claim. Some argue that Darius may have invented Aquêmenes altogether, or at least elevated a relatively unknown tribal figure into a legendary founder. A convenient origin story designed to unify the past and justify the present. Even those famous inscriptions at Pasargadae, where Cyrus the Great is identified as an Aquemenid, are now debated. There is evidence suggesting they may not have been commissioned by Cyrus himself, but Darius, years after Cyrus's death. If true, that would mean Darius was actively reshaping history, tying the greatest conqueror of the age directly to his claimed bloodline. So we are left with a question that still lingers. Was Aquêmenes a real mountain leader who quietly shaped the future? Or was he a carefully constructed legend carved into stone by a king who needed the past to obey him just as much as the present? We may never know with complete certainty, but one thing is undeniable. Real or myth, Aquêmenes gave his name to a dynasty that would define an era, the Aquemenid dynasty, one of the most powerful and influential empires of the ancient world. And in the end, perhaps that is truly what matters.